They found a warning sign nailed to a tree, but the words were scratched out violently. At first I thought it was old vandalism. Teenagers with a knife and too much time. But the gouges were deep, frantic, layered over each other until the wood beneath was shredded into pale curls. Whoever had done it hadn't just wanted the words gone. They'd wanted them erased. The sign hung crooked on a pine at the edge of the trail, rusted nails biting into the bark. A rectangle of weathered plywood, gray with age. The paint that once carried the message had been scraped away so aggressively that only fragments remained. The tail of a letter, the curve of another. I traced one of the gouges with my thumb and felt the splinters catch my skin. "What do you think it said?" Mark asked. He stood a few steps back, hands on his pack straps, already bored. Behind him, the forest stretched on in layered greens and blacks, tall trunks rising like columns into a canopy that swallowed the light. It was late afternoon, but the woods felt dimmer than they should have, as if evening had arrived early and without asking. "Probably just no trespassing," Jenna said. "Or private property. People freak out about that stuff out here. Or bare area," Luke added, half smiling. "You know, to scare hikers." I didn't answer. There was something about the sign that bothered me beyond the damage. The scratches weren't random. They clustered where words would have been, stopping cleanly at the edges of where the letters once sat, as if the person scraping had been very careful to destroy only the message. "Whatever it was," Mark said, already turning back to the trail. "It's old. Trail's still on the map. We're fine." I hesitated, then followed. I told myself it was nothing, just a relic of some long-forgotten warning. But as we walked deeper into the woods, I kept thinking about the violence in those marks, about the urgency they implied. The trail narrowed after the sign, the packed dirt giving way to a thin ribbon of leaves and roots. The air grew cooler, heavier, carrying the damp, metallic smell of rot and soil. Somewhere deeper in the forest, something creaked, wood shifting, or maybe a branch rubbing against another in the breeze. Except there was no breeze. We walked for another 15 minutes before the first strange thing happened. I was in the back, watching our footprints fade behind us, when I realized the forest had gone quiet. Not gradually, but all at once. No birds, no insects. Even the crunch of our boots sounded muffled, like we were walking on felt instead of leaves. "Do you hear that?" I asked. "Hear what?" Jenna said. "Exactly." They stopped, listened. Mark frowned. "It's just quiet." "No," I said. "It wasn't like this before." Luke shrugged. "Forests get quiet sometimes. Animals hide when people come through." I wanted to argue, but the moment stretched, awkward and thin, and then a bird called somewhere off to the left. Another answered. The normal sounds seeped back in, tentative at first, then steady. I felt foolish. We kept going. The trail looped around a shallow ravine, the ground dropping away into a tangle of ferns and shadowed rock. As we crossed a narrow wooden footbridge, I noticed something carved into the railing. Letters, shallow but deliberate. "Don't." The rest had been scraped away, the wood beneath gouged raw. "Guys," I said, pointing. Mark leaned in. "That's new." "No, it's not," Jenna said. "Look at the weathering. It's old." "But it matches the sign," I said. "Same kind of damage." Luke laughed, a short, sharp sound. "You're reading too much into it." Maybe I was. The rational part of my brain lined up explanations. Pranksters, bored locals, a history we didn't know. But another part of me, the quiet, instinctive part, kept whispering that the damage wasn't meant to scare people away. It was meant to keep something from being read. By the time the light started to thin, the trail markers stopped appearing. The map on Mark's phone still showed the path continuing, but the ground beneath our feet told a different story. The trail forked without signage, one branch dipping into darker woods, the other climbing toward a ridge where the trees grew twisted and sparse. "We should head back," I said. "We've got plenty of daylight," Mark replied, though he glanced up at the sky. "We'll loop around." "Are you sure this is the loop?" Jenna asked. He zoomed in on the map, then out again. "Yeah, I think so." I had the sudden, unsettling feeling that I'd been standing at this fork before, that I'd already watched them debate, already heard Mark's confident tone, already felt the same knot tightening in my stomach. Didn't we? I started, then stopped. The thought slipped away, leaving only a faint echo. What? Luke asked. Nothing, I said. Sorry. I'm tired. We took the left path, the one that dipped. The forest there felt older. The trees grew closer together, their bark dark and ridged, their roots lifting the ground into uneven waves. The air smelled stale, like a room that had been closed for too long. As we walked, I noticed shapes carved into the trunks, lines and symbols half swallowed by growth. Not decorative, repetitive, the same marks again and again, always facing the trail. Are those trail markers? Jenna asked. No, I said. They're too deliberate. Luke touched one with his fingertips. Maybe some kind of old boundary thing. Or warnings, I said. He rolled his eyes. You really want this to be something, don't you? I opened my mouth to respond, but stopped. Ahead of us, nailed to another tree, was a second sign. This one was larger, newer. The wood hadn't weathered to gray yet. The nails were bright with rust. And the scratches, the violent, frantic scratches, were fresher. The pale wood beneath still raw. I stepped closer. Beneath the gouges, faint impressions remained, like bruises under skin. If I tilted my head just right, I could almost see the shapes of the letters, the negative space they'd left behind. Luke squinted. Can you make it out? I swallowed. My heart had started to race. I think so. Mark laughed nervously. You're kidding. The letters weren't words so much as instructions. Not a name or a threat, but a description. Do not. The rest blurred, my vision tunneling as a memory surfaced. Standing here before, reading this, feeling the same dread. Except that was impossible. This was my first time on this trail. I was sure of it. Say it, Jenna whispered. I shook my head. I don't want to. That's not funny, she said. I know. Something moved off the trail to our right. Not a shape exactly, more a shift, like the forest itself had leaned closer to listen. The light dimmed, not from the sky, but from the trees, their shadows deepening and stretching across the ground toward us. Okay, Mark said, his voice tight. We're done. We're turning around. We turned. The trail behind us was gone. In its place stood dense woods, unbroken by any path. The footbridge, the fork, the ravine, all swallowed by trees that looked as old and undisturbed as the rest. That's not possible, Luke said. We just came that way. I felt dizzy, my thoughts slipping. Had we? Or had we always been here, circling, reading signs, forgetting them? From deeper in the forest came a sound like breathing. Not one breath, but many, layered and slow. The trees ahead of us bore more scratches now, fresh ones, appearing even as we watched, lines carving themselves into bark with invisible force. Jenna grabbed my arm. What is that? I understood then. The signs weren't warnings about a place. They were warnings about attention, about being seen. The scratching grew louder, closer, as if something massive and patient were adjusting itself beneath the forest floor, aligning with us. I thought of the way the words had been erased, not to hide them from us, but to keep whatever read them from knowing we understood. The last thing I saw before the light failed completely was a new sign, forming ahead of us as if the forest were growing it into place. This one hadn't been scratched out yet, and whatever was watching us had finally learned our names. Their firewood pile kept growing larger, though none of them had gathered more. The cabin was supposed to be temporary, 3 weeks at most, long enough for the storm systems to break and the road back to be plowed. That was the plan we agreed on when we hauled our packs in on sleds, laughing about how quiet it would be, how good it would feel to be snowed in somewhere warm. There were 4 of us. Me, my sister Mara, her husband Joel, and Evan, an old friend who knew the woods better than anyone. The cabin sat in a bowl of firs and black spruce, their branches sagging under weeks of snow. No cell service. One radio temperamental, a wood stove that groaned when it heated, as if remembering older winters. On the first night, Evan stacked the firewood by the door. Split logs, pale and resin-sweet, stacked chest-high against the wall. Enough, he said, for 10 days if we were careful. Maybe 12. The cold came early. It pressed against the cabin like a living thing, sighing through the chinks, tapping the windows with brittle fingers of ice. We burned wood constantly, feeding the stove until the metal glowed dull red. The pile shrank fast, and by the third day I remember counting logs with quiet panic, doing the math in my head and coming up short. That was when Mara noticed it. She stood in the doorway with her gloves half on, frowning. "Did one of you res-tack this?" We all looked. The pile was taller. Not by much, maybe 4 or 5 logs more than it should have been. Fresh ones, too. Their split faces were damp, darker than the others, sap beating like sweat. Joel laughed, uneasy. "You miscounted." "I didn't," she said. "I always count." Evan knelt, running a thumb along the grain. He frowned, but said nothing. Outside, the forest was windless, holding its breath. That night I dreamed of chopping. The sound echoed, thud, 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 through a white, empty world. When I woke, my arms ached. The pile grew again. This time no one laughed. We'd burned steadily all day. The stove had eaten at least a dozen logs. Still, the stack reached the same height as before, neat as a carpenter's display. The new pieces were heavier, denser. When Joel lifted one, it left a wet imprint on his gloves. "Someone's messing with us," he said, forcing a grin. Evan shook his head. No tracks. That was the thing. The snow around the cabin was untouched. No footprints, no drag marks. The trees stood in their frozen ranks, bark dark and unbroken. We stopped burning the new logs. Evan suggested it first, quietly, just in case. So we marked the older wood with charcoal scratches and used only those. Every morning, more unmarked logs appeared at the bottom of the stack, as if the pile were growing from the ground up. By the end of the week, the cabin smelled wrong. Not rot, something sharper, metallic under the pine. When the stove was hot, the air took on a greasy sweetness that made my stomach turn. Joel woke screaming one night. He said he'd heard knocking from inside the walls. Not on them, within them. Slow, patient knocks spaced like a heartbeat. The radio crackled once and died for good. On the 9th day, we found hair in the woodpile. It was caught in a split, frozen into the sap like amber. Long, dark strands, matted together. Mara went pale. She touched her own hair, counted reflexively, then pulled her hand back as if burned. Evan took the log outside and hacked at it until it came apart. Inside, the wood was wrong. The grain twisted in looping whirls, knots bulging like joints. There was something pale embedded deep, something that caught the light. A fingernail. We didn't say the word. We didn't have to. The forest loomed closer that night, branches scraping the roof though the wind hadn't risen. The pile grew faster after that. We barricaded the door, nailed boards across the windows. The stove went cold. We were afraid to feed it anything at all. Frost crept across the walls in feathery veins. Our breath smoked. Mara disappeared first. One moment she was asleep beside me, breath shallow, eyes flickering. The next, her blankets were empty and cold. The door was still barred, the windows intact. Outside, the woodpile towered higher than my head. There was a log near the top I recognized. A scar on the bark, where Mara had nicked herself splitting wood on the second day. The cut was still there, dark and thin. Joel broke then. He clawed at the pile, screaming her name, ripping logs free with bare hands. Under the bark, beneath the pale sapwood, there were shapes, curves too smooth, angles too deliberate. Teeth, a length of rib. The wood groaned as if in pain. The forest answered. Branches bent inward. Roots broke the surface of the snow, writhing like fingers. The logs in the pile shifted, settling, stacking themselves with soft, intimate sounds. Evan tried to run. He made it 3 steps past the clearing before the trees closed. I heard him shouting, felt it in my chest. Then the sound changed, became the rhythm of chopping I dreamed of, steady and inevitable. The pile grew one last time. By morning, I was alone. The cabin was a shell, rimed with frost, the stove a black mouth. The woodpile filled the clearing, a monument of pale trunks and split limbs, stacked with reverent care. There was one log at the top that wasn't quite finished. My jacket sleeve was there, half buried, the fabric stiff with sap. When I touched it, the wood beneath was warm. The forest doesn't waste anything in winter. I understand that now. The firewood pile is still growing.